You're a 5-year-old after that.
Okay. I think we'll get started a little bit earlier. I've heard some good conversations, and I always hate to end them. I think you guys very well could do some of the stuff for Bible study on your own. There's nothing magical about meeting together. Like, you could pull out the thing and look at the questions if you have some friends over and you wanted to. So we were going to start with forgiveness. It's right after the deliver us part of the Our Father. That feels a little bit right now that I think about it. I wonder if maybe we did talk about this a little bit, but that's okay. We'll review quickly. Forgiveness. Jesus talks about in the Our Father, we pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. The comparison is being made between how we are forgiven and how we're meant to treat other people. And also between how we treat other people and how we are forgiven. Like, Jesus talks about it working in both directions. He says at one point, the measure with which you measure will be measured out to you. If you approach other people with generosity, with forgiveness in your heart, if you forgive those who wrong you, then you can be forgiven much. If you hold grudges against them and you find yourself sliding into bitterness, that might not be so good, because it's like Jesus is saying, well, he's going to hold grudges against you then. I don't think he deals with bitterness in the same way, but like he's bringing about, he wants us to see a concordance between the way that we forgive other people and the way that God will forgive us. We're invited to be generous in our forgiveness. One of the great parables is the parable of the servant who owes 10,000 talents. And one of the challenges we have with it is that if you don't convert the units, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So a talent was about 1,000 days' wages for a laborer. So give or take 3-ish years of labor. You could think 3 years of a salary. So 1,000 days for a laborer, which means the person who owes 10,000 talents owes 10 million days labor. And 10 million days labor is a debt you cannot pay. You can't pay a 10 million days labor debt because you won't live for 10 million days, at least here in this world. You don't have 10 million days of your life. In fact, even some of you that are into later years, you probably don't have as many days of your life as you think you would.
Yeah. Oh, you never know.
Well, actually you do. If you multiply like 90 by 365, you'll figure it out really fast how many days you've had.
Oh, yeah, you can.
We don't know how many we're going to be here for, but this is the point, is that even if you lived for 100 years, you would live for 36,500 days, which means you're still well short of 10 million. And so the one debt is 10 million days labor. Then he gets that debt forgiven by the master. And the debt that he is owed is 100 days labor. So you're comparing 10 million to 100. Now 100 days is still a big debt, but that's actually a debt that you can pay. And so Jesus' point in that parable is to say, if you were forgiven a debt you could not possibly pay, who are you to hold it over your brother or sister, a debt that they could pay? Like, you've been forgiven more than you will ever be worthy of in your life because God has forgiven us so much. And so we're invited to forgive each other. And this is not because we deserve it or other people deserve it. God doesn't forgive us because of who we are. God forgives us because of who He is. He forgives us because He is good and forgiving. Now, it certainly helps if you respond in love and do all of these things. It's not to disqualify that. But the forgiveness comes from God because of who He is. That's the model that we're invited to move forward with. That we are forgiving of other people because of who we are. Not because they deserve it, not because it's going to be repaid, but because of the richness of grace that we have received. And then he takes up fasting. I wonder if we've done this, but anyway, fasting is, our current temptation is not to fast at all. We've gone from there's some cultures where you don't need to practice fasting very much because they do lots of fasting in general. Our culture, we have all kinds of stuff all the time, and most of us aren't very good at fasting. So food fasting is one of the ways to start. And the idea is you're denying yourself something good so that for a spiritual gain. Like food in an ordinary course of things is a good thing. You should eat. But there's times where you give it up for something greater, where you give it up for something better, the love of God, the life of heaven, to put your treasure in a healthier place. And there's training for our bodies in that. There's training for our minds in that. I think one of the challenges that happens as we age is that it becomes a lot easier to become impatient with other people. When things don't go your way, you act dramatically more about it. That's a great place to think of fasting. To let go of impatience. To be kind and generous with people. Again, not because they deserve it. We get caught up in that all the time. Well, they don't deserve it, you know. I was told that I was going to get this at this time. And it's like, you probably were. And you probably should. It might be owed to you. But is it really that big of a deal? If God has forgiven you and me all of my sins and all of your sins, what is it to wait 5 extra minutes for your hamburger? You know? And you start thinking about it and you start to realize we get caught up in this stuff all the time. We get caught up in ourselves. That's why fasting is so important, because it's mortification of self-will. That will inside of you that says, I want it my way and I want it now, needs to die, because that will can't go to heaven. In heaven, there's no I want it my way and I want it now. It's, Lord, I give you everything, and that's it. It's surrender. Now, it doesn't mean that God is never going to return the favor. You never get your way, but we have to learn to say no to things because we turn into monsters. If you want to make a kid into a monster, give them everything they ask for. This is important as grandparents. You can't give your grandkids everything they ask for. They turn into monsters. Part of being a parent is recognizing that not everything they want is good for them. We don't always want the right things. And this is equally true as adults. If you get everything you want, if all of your meals are things that you like, if you never have to eat things that you don't like, it's really easy to turn into a self-righteous grouch. And you grouse at these vegetables because they're overcooked, and that pasta because it's undercooked, and who knows what else. And it goes on and on and on. When does it end? You know? Human nature doesn't change that much. This is part of the reason why we need to fast, why we need to work at mortifying that self-will, because if you don't, you turn into a monster. And God doesn't want monsters. He wants disciples. He wants lovers. So, giving up a meal, giving up dessert, choosing smaller portions, eating things that you don't like. There's lots of you that could do lots of fasting with vegetables. And if you get real excited, try eating salad without salad dressing someday. It's a glorious exercise in the destruction of self-will. It's not very good. I had this broccoli today, and I didn't put any ranch on it, and it was kind of bitter tasting, and oh boy, it was broccoli. You know, you can find self-denial in all kinds of things. Maybe you have a way where you always like to take a crazy hot shower. You don't have to go all the way to a cold shower, but try turning it not so hot. You know, maybe you have a favorite show you love to watch and you chew anyone out who sits in your spot when you're sitting down to watch it. You know, that's a good thing. Sitting on the other side of the living room won't kill you. So it's important to recognize, to learn that we have to practice self-denial. We have to practice fasting. And the challenge is, at least for a number of you, you're in a phase in life where you don't have someone to force you to do it. And so you have to decide to do it yourself. Sometimes fasting and self-denial can be all kinds of other things too. If you feel alone and afraid, or you feel kind of depressed and you don't want to go out, ooh, there's another good one. You know, it's easy to say, well, it's cold outside and I just want my cup of hot cocoa and I don't want to handle that. I don't want to deal with it. It's perfect. Like, there's a perfect opportunity to deny self-will. Sometimes it's even for good things. It can even be for things you enjoy. Going out to visit someone, for instance. So, this is meant to be an everyday thing. To think of giving of yourself. And it can be in lots of small ways, but there's good practice in this. If, you know, you've done something that annoys your spouse for a decade, try tackling that. And they tend to be habits. And those are hard to change. You know? It can be calling friends. It can be any number of things. But fasting is necessary practice for us. And I say that to myself just as much as anyone. One of the greatest things I did for fasting one year for Lent was to set a bedtime. Oh, Dickens, that was just bananas. You would never think that there's so many things you could do at night until you try setting a bedtime. Just try it once. You could even say, I'm just going to do it for a week. I didn't believe Father. I didn't believe that I would find things to do when I was going to bed. Some of you are of an age where maybe you don't, but there's a lot of us where it's like, oh, but I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I needed to do that, and I needed to do that, and then you look up and it's like, oh, it's bedtime. Like, I don't want to go to bed yet. That year, I think I did 10 or 10:30. Now, oh, you say it's not very hard. How much money do you want to bet? If we try it for the next month and you tell me if it's hard or not.
Watch the 10 o'clock news and then I will.
Yep. Leave it off a little bit.
So set your bedtime at 10 o'clock.
Oh.
Go to bed at 9 o'clock.
I mean, you know, for some people it's not bedtime, it's wake-up time. For some people, fasting is choosing not to let yourself get up at 4 in the morning and just staying up because it's not really worth it. Sometimes that's the fasting part. There's you'll find your self-will. If you start looking for it, if you get suspicious that there's self-will in your life, you won't have to look very far. It won't take very long. You will find it. And it's important to remember that that kind of self-will we don't get to take into heaven. This is part of the reason some people wonder why purgatory takes a long time. Well, because you have to learn to let go. No grouchy people get into heaven. And some of us have grouchy days. Treasure in heaven. This is such a great line. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I would say what it means, the corollary, is where you put your time and your energy, that's where your treasure is. And some of us have this problem that we have a divorce between the person that we like to be and we like to think we are, and the person that we actually are. For instance, lots of you would like to say, and I would be the same way. I could pick on myself. You know, I'd like to be a priest who prays a lot. That's a good thing to pray a lot. When are you going to do it? If you've been saying that for 10 years, you're not that kind of priest. It just don't work that way. And it's just like, well, darn. Yeah, but But no, I want to be, and you can think of all kinds of things. You can put this in all kinds of situations. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Sometimes you find your heart set on things of this world. Fasting is one of the great tools that we're given to help tackle that. Our hearts are not just where we want them to be. That's so important. We live in a world that likes to say, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. So all these things that I do, they don't matter so much. Well, really, how do you know? Are we really good people? That's one thing that we have to start with. I had one of my students today who started kind of on that track. He's like, well, I'm a good person. And I said, oh, St. Paul has something to say to you. Book of Romans, I think it's in chapter 6. No one is righteous, not even one. What are you going to do? Like, you have scripture and you have your idea. Who's going to win? And we can have all these kinds of things. We like to believe that we're good people, but Jesus says the just man sins 7 times a day, and St. Paul says the wages of sin is death. And so if you're a good person, but you sin 7 times a day, and so your soul dies 7 times a day, we've got problems. You see, like, the logic starts to work. It starts to get hard. So saying I'm a good person is not a good place to start. It's much better to say I need a Savior, because those are the people Jesus is coming to save. But where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where you spend your time, where you give your energy, there is your treasure. And so if you want your treasure to be in heaven, if you want to be set on this kingdom and on this path, when does that happen? Where does it happen in your life? And I mean this really practically. It's very easy to deceive ourselves. One of the best ways to say the proof is in the pudding is to look at your calendar in the last month and look at what actually happened. Because again, we like to believe a lot of things about ourselves. And it's like, we like to believe that we're good people and we spend time in prayer, and then you look at your list last week and it's like, well, I missed that day and I missed that day and I missed that, and like, this happens. I'm not trying to pick on anyone in particular. This, I think, is why this is in the Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus recognizes this, that we get lost. No one can serve 2 masters. Oh, darn. This is not very fun. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Lord, go away. We can think of lots of examples where this doesn't happen. Where it does happen, where you want to say, well, I can serve 2 things. I can strive for treasure in this world, and I can strive for treasure in heaven. And again, a lot of us end up in that kind of direction. And darn it, we run into these words of Jesus, and it's just like, Lord, really? Why can't I serve 2 people? It's nice. It works. But his point is that we eventually start to prefer one and hate the other. There's no way around that. I think one of the best examples of this are people that practice polygamy, so multiple marriages, and they have shows about this now, right? And people are like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter, we can do what we want. And then you listen to them, and what you find very, very quickly is they're jockeying for position, and there's jealousy. It's just this open relationship and everything is supposed to be fine. And as soon as you peel back the layer even a little bit, you find all kinds of jealousy and rivalry, and they're tearing each other down. They're trying to attract the attention of the other person. Why? Because it's wrong. It's not the right way to live. But it's like, you don't even really have to blame people for it. You could just say, well, let's listen, see what they say. And you don't have to listen for very long before you're like, oh, so it's a healthy relationship when you're constantly trying to kill the other person. Wow, this is great. No one can serve 2 masters. We're meant to look at how we approach material possessions, to think of treasures on this earth. Jesus says, like, the stuff on this earth, do not store up treasure where moth and rust can destroy, where thieves can come and steal. Store up your treasure in heaven. And like anyone else, I think this is hard. I mean, trying to find the pathway through this, because it doesn't mean that you have to give away every cent that you've ever had and just be poor on the street. That would be foolish. There's certainly no wisdom there. Betty, did you get your pages back?
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
She went and made copies. I
I am so sorry.
store up your treasure in heaven. And there's hard, this is hard here. How do you navigate this well? How much is God calling me to give when it comes to material possessions? That's something we certainly have to wrestle with. But it's not the only place where we have treasure. It's easy to start limiting this to material things. Sometimes the treasure that you have that you can give the most of is your time. Sometimes one of the things that can be most treasured is making phone calls to people who annoy you and spending time talking to people. Why? Because you feel like you're wasting it and you have to confront that self-will. There's a reality on this, and it's easy to start storing up treasure here in this world. I think it happens to us all the time. Sometimes it's good to think of, like Jesus talks about, invite those to your house who are not going to repay you. Invite those to a meal who aren't going to reciprocate, where you're going to have to give, you're going to have to pay the bill, and they're not going to return the favor. That's a lot harder. You know, he talks about inviting in the poor and the lame. Matthew eats with tax collectors and sinners. You know, he throws a party at his house. This is probably a loud party full of drunk people, and Jesus likes it. It's like, I don't like that very much, Jesus. No, you should have a different idea. Darn it. You know, you would think, who does Jesus preach to? Well, the people that come to church. And you read the gospel, and it's actually the opposite. The people that come to church or the synagogue don't like him, and the people on the street do. That's just not the Jesus that I like very much sometimes. Because the rubber really starts to hit the road when you see the person standing on the side of the road with a sign and you're annoyed. And it's hard. And it's like, well, they don't deserve it. Or maybe they're going to use money for bad things. Or maybe they could get a job. And a million other thoughts can go through your head. And, oh boy, store up treasure in heaven. Give not because of who they are, but because of who you are. That's a lot harder. And I don't pretend to have the answers to this. I don't pretend that this is an easy thing. There's difficulty here that we have to encounter and wrestle with. And darn it, if it's not hard, you're doing it wrong. If it doesn't hit you between the eyeballs, if it doesn't convict your heart, if it doesn't squeeze things and you're like, ooh, this is uncomfortable, then we're not hearing the message. Because this is uncomfortable Christianity. This is when it starts to get real. This is when it's not so safe. Christianity at church on Sundays is the easy part, and even that's hard enough. It's amazing how often people try to be, the good holy people, and they show up for Mass, and then 30 seconds after it's over, they're trying to hit 50 before they leave the parking lot, and you better not be in front of them because they're probably not going to use their blinker. It's an amazing thing. It's easy to get a lack of freedom. When we're thinking about earthly treasure constantly, it possesses our hearts. Our hearts go where our treasure is. And this point is important to make. It is so easy to deceive ourselves. It is so easy to justify what we do. It is so easy to, well, it's not me, it's someone else. It's those people, it's this group, it's that group. They need to change. Huh, maybe they do. But the message of the gospel is, so do I. The message of Jesus is that change has to start with me. Why? Because it's hard enough inside of you and you can't control anyone else. I was telling my seniors, and my sophomores too, it's like, your parents can't force you to do things. They really can't. If you dig your heels in and decide you're going to do it your way, unless they're going to stand there and hold a gun to your head, which won't work for very long, it's not going to happen. No, they'll certainly pressure and incentivize things, but they can't force you to do it. You have to decide to do it because it's right. You have to decide to do it because you want to. I mean, even it's amazing. You can even watch real young kids, and if they decide they don't want to be held, what are you going to do? Eventually, you let them win. Because if you try and hold them, they just squirm and fight you the whole time, and you give in. But it's the same way. It's like we can't stop other people in the world. You know, we can't fix all of the problems in our government, or all the problems in Mexico, or all the problems in who knows where else. The Ukraine and Russia and India and China, and there's a whole list of them right now. Right? Jesus talks about this because it's a real temptation. And I think it's easy for us to lose sight of the fact that this is a message for us, here and now in our day. Not just for rich people in New York on Wall Street, not just for people who are anti-church, not just for the crazy purple-haired ones with like 6,000 earrings. It's for them too, believe me. It's not to diminish that. But there is a real temptation here. Another problem we run into, and this is on the other side, and this is probably equally as deadly, is the problem of never having enough. Of never being enough. The problem of scarcity. When something isn't good enough, when it isn't put in the right spot enough, when it's not warm enough or cold enough or hot enough or humid enough or who knows. And we have these. We run into this. That problem lies in our hearts as well, that things are never enough. And I think you have to take a step back and ask yourself, do you treat other people like this? Because there's people who want to say, I'm a loving person, but every time someone tries to do something for you, it's never enough. It's never the right way. And it's everything from how you put the toilet paper on the little roll to how you stack a dishwasher. It's never enough. If that's you, that fits into this problem of scarcity. And it's good to ask, what will ever be enough for you? When does that end? When do you reach the end of that desire? And the answer is you never will, because desires don't work that way. You can choose to accept what you're given. You can choose to be thankful in the midst of situations. Sometimes with kids, it's hard enough to get them to do a homework assignment, and then they don't do it very well, and you kind of want to, smack them in the head or something. And you have to praise them for it, because if you don't, they start to think that you're a mean teacher and nothing they ever do is good enough, and they're never going to make it. And it's a hard balance. It's like you have to be encouraging to support them, but you also have to be demanding enough that you can't leave them sit where they are and just be bums, because if you ask high schoolers, school would never happen and they'd never get taught anything. And that's not good for them either. But it's a big thing. Lots of us live in a world which is really, really backwards. We live in the wealthiest, most powerful society that has ever existed on the face of the earth, by far. By hundreds of thousands of times. It's crazy that even our poor people have enough food. And if you read anything about history, you will discover that people died from starvation all the time. Most of us have never known a famine. I'm scared for our society when we actually have one, because it's going to be bananas. We've never actually had to deal with starvation. And that's crazy. You now never even have to worry about droughts and not being able to get coffee. And that's crazy. You might be grousing about how much it costs at the grocery store, that's true, but you can still buy coffee every single day of the entire year. And you've probably had that for your entire life. Now, maybe you can't buy the nice coffee, and maybe there's some of it that's too expensive, fair enough. But we've never known a society with lack. Sure, some of you grew up in an age where you knew a lot more of it than we do now. But even then, it's really amazing. one of the things that's bizarre to me is you see the people standing on the side of the road begging for money, and lots of them have cell phones. And nice cell phones. And it's like, it doesn't work in my brain, because it's like, how do you pay for the cell phone if you don't have food? I don't get that. I don't know how that works. But that's also really, really bizarre as a society. And so it's like, even if we live in a small home, just the fact that you have running water makes you in like the wealthiest 1/10 of 1/10 of 1/10 of a percent of people that have ever existed on planet Earth. And yet so many of us take running water for granted. I was asking the seniors today the two inventions that I would never want to live without. And they have all kinds of things. They're talking about cell phones and electricity and yeah, those kind of things they would have a hard time living without. Do you know what my two are? You should. I've talked about them before.
Paperclip.
No, far more important than paper clips. We could chuck all the paper clips on Earth and I wouldn't be bothered. Those indoor plumbing is one. Indoor plumbing and refrigeration. Because those two things change relationships all over the place. A great book, if you want to read something that's from your generation, is called Alas, Babylon. It was written in 1959, and it's the story of the Cold War if the Russians won and there was a nuclear war. And basically all of society shuts off, and then they have to figure out what to do. And this is the age long before the internet, and it's still really crazy. And like one of the most essential things that they run into that they need, that they don't have enough of, and this would be a big problem in North Dakota. Salt. Because it turns out that when you don't have refrigeration, guess what you need truckloads of? Salt to preserve meat and to preserve food. And if you start using salt, you get to a place, like think of this. What would happen for you if grocery stores weren't getting deliveries and they sold out of things? How long would you have food? There's no way to store in your house enough that you would need for maybe more than a handful of months realistically. And lots of us, if we started going to the grocery store, and they had bare shelves, for a week it would be hard. And for a month, things would start to break. But for a year, for 2 years, it would be difficult. I think actually we'd have to abandon North Dakota because I don't think you could live here in the winter, but that's another problem. If thermonuclear war breaks out, I think the only thing you could do is immediately leave in your car and drive south. And in cities, everyone will die. Because, again, if you want to see a society in chaos, take away the food supply. And everything you think that you know about the people around you no longer exists. Because when people are hungry, they are desperate, and it changes everything. And it's really, really bananas. So there's some good thought experiments. Alas, Babylon, it's kind of a fun book. It's a very different sort of thing. It's a novel of its era. And so there's funny things about it.